Hi, welcome to my series on the Great Highland Bagpipe. My name is Jordan Key. I am a bagpipe player. I'm also a composer by trade, and so I've written many pieces for the bagpipes and worked with many other people who have written for the bagpipe. From request, I am starting this series on bagpipe music and how to write for the bagpipes. This is the introduction video. We're going to look at some of the basics that anyone should be aware of if they're going to be writing for bagpipes as a solo instrument or with any other combination of standard instruments. The first thing to be well aware of, if you pick up any Scottish bagpipe music, you might assume that it's in some kind of A tonality, but in fact this is a transposing instrument. The Great Highland Bagpipes will tune somewhere between 470 Hz to 490 Hz A, and it can vary wildly from instrument to instrument, bagpiper to bagpiper, and from day to day depending upon humidity, temperature, all kinds of factors. So if you're going to write for bagpipe plus other instruments, it's probably easier to write a piece that is in B flat than it is to have the bagpipe try to tune down to concert A. The bagpipe is a medieval instrument in its construction, and so it is not well suited to drastic intonation changes. There are some things that you can do to potentially tune your bagpipe down to concert A, but this is not going to be optimal for the instrument, and it will sound worse. It would be like trying to tune your B flat trumpet down to A and make it an A trumpet. You could potentially do this, but the trumpet's just not going to work as well. It's not going to sound as nice. The bagpipe should probably stay in around 480 Hertz. The bagpipe doesn't have chromatic capabilities for the most part, so don't think that like, oh well, we'll just change keys and the bagpipes can just play a different scale. Most bagpipers that you will encounter will be able to play an A mixolydian scale, because that's most of what's available in the bagpipe. Now, more skilled players can manipulate their reeds and instruments to get a few additional notes, and we'll talk about these in a later video. Generally speaking, bagpipes do not have rest in their music. Most bagpipers that you will encounter won't even be familiar with rest notation in music unless they play another instrument. You don't teach this to bagpipers because there's no point to it. There is no rest in bagpipe music. The bagpipe, of course, features drones. So on this bagpipe here, there are 3 drones, these tall pipes that will stick up over the bagpiper's shoulder. The bass drone does an A, 2 octaves below that 480 A on the bagpipe chanter, and then the tenor drones do an octave below that 480 A on the bagpipe chanter, and then the chanter's lowest A is the 480 Hertz-ish A, and then there is an actual high A on the chanter, which is the octave above, of course. Generally speaking, these drones sound at this A. You can tune them. Of course, any bagpiper, you will see them if they know what they're doing, they will tune their drones before they play, and they'll potentially tune their drones at some midpoint during any kind of concert because they quickly go out of tune. But generally speaking, you're not going to be able to tune these drones to a significantly different pitch without doing some serious manipulation. You might be able to get a semitone up or down from these drones by extremely extending them or extremely contracting them, but generally speaking, don't rely on that. You can get drone extensions, so these are often really fashioned just to extend the drones so that they are flatter and thus sound at concert A, but you can also potentially fashion makeshift extensions that can go out of the tops of the drones that could significantly change the pitch of the instrument. This I will discuss in a later video about extended drone techniques. Each of the drones has a single reed inside of it, but they will feature in a later video on extended drone techniques, and we'll talk about different things you might be able to do with your drone reeds to accomplish different kinds of sounds, and even the sounds the drone reeds make on their own. Of course, the bagpipe is generally a loud instrument. There are a few instruments that are much louder than the bagpipes when they're at their loudest. There are different kinds of Scottish and Irish and British bagpipes that all kind of operate very similarly, but are much quieter. These might be called the parlor pipes, the small pipes, the fireside pipes, the fairy pipes. There's very many different varieties of these. Certainly those will work better in combination with other instruments, and that's what they are really designed to do. The Great Highland Pipe, which you see next to me, is that really loud one you hear in like St. Patrick's Day parades. It's going to drown out any instrument that is quiet. Speaking of dynamics, the bagpipe has no dynamics. It is loud. It is always loud and will only ever be loud. Unless you buy one of these smaller, quieter pipes, and then they will always be the volume they are. So don't specify volume, the dynamics for a bagpipe. Now, there are a few things you can do to adjust that volume slightly, and that is mostly about the strength of the reeds that you're using in the instrument. I will talk about this in a later video dealing with extended reed techniques. Speaking of the reed, the bagpipe is a double-reeded instrument. If I take out the melodic piece in the bagpipe, called the chanter, inside of it you have a double reed, similar to an oboe or bassoon. However, this reed is much stiffer than an oboe or bassoon reed on average, and is generally played dry. Speaking of the chanter, since I have it in my hand already, let's talk a little bit about what it has on it. So you'll notice that there are just a limited number of holes. There's a back hole, and if we flip it around, we have a hole there, and you can see all the way down to the bottom. So there are 9 playable holes as far as traditional techniques will be concerned. We only have these 8 holes. That means we only have 9 notes. As far as most bagpipers are concerned, there are 9 pitches on this instrument and only 9 pitches. And the pitches comprise the octave of the Mixolydian scale on B flat, as well as the lower auxiliary of that scale. Of course, the other modes are available within this range, and we'll talk about this in a video all about the variations of bagpipe scales. So not every tune in bagpipe is in a Mixolydian, not at all. If we play mostly around D instead of our A, in fact we're in D Ionian or D major. So you can certainly have a D hypo-Ionian scale. We have E hypodorian-ish kind of scale. We have a B Aeolian without the complete octave. All of those modes are in some sense available to some extent on this instrument. You'll have also noticed that this chanter is taped. Bagpipers will have their chanter taped merely because this is the only way to make fine adjustments to the intonation of pitches, which need to happen pretty frequently. So we merely add a little tape to cover a little bit more of the hole to make it flatter, because it slightly extends the length of the pipe, or we take a little bit of tape off to open up the hole, moving it back slightly up the instrument and shortening the pipe. So of course, there's the potential of extreme taping to accomplish entire semitone or potentially whole tone changes on some of these notes on the instrument, and we'll talk about that in a different video. The last thing to introduce in this brief introduction to writing for the Great Highland Bagpipe is the music itself. If you look at any bagpipe music, and I'll put some up on the screen, you'll notice that there are a lot of little notes, which are often called grace notes, embellishments, ornamentations, and even articulation. So these grace notes are in fact rudimentarily, fundamentally, the way that the bagpipe is articulated, since there is no way of tonguing or any other fashion of articulating the note, since the reed is totally separate from the bagpiper's body. It is inside of this air reservoir. If I have a repeated note, I can't briefly stop that airflow with my tongue as a saxophone player would do or an oboe player would do. I have to do something different to articulate two repeated notes. And so, in fact, the method of articulation for the bagpipe is the rapid changing of the length of the air column of the instrument. So if you watch a bagpiper play, you will notice tiny liftings of the fingers. And this is actually just a rapid change of the air column length. If my air column length is down to this hole here, and I quickly lift my other index finger up here, suddenly the length of the air column is this long as compared to this long. And we get a little blip. And, while this in a very rudimentary fashion has a utilitarian purpose over centuries, this necessity of articulation has developed into an entire system of artistic ornamentation in and of itself, such that there are very complex ornamentations possible on this instrument. I will talk about in a different video on ornamentation on the bagpipe and extended ornamentation on the bagpipe. So, if you're writing bagpipe music, you'll probably want to include these ornamentations. Without such ornamentations, the bagpipe doesn't quite sound like a bagpipe. You'll need to familiarize yourself with the ornamentations that are idiomatic, and, feel free to explore ornamentations that are different, something that's your own invention. It might have to be a conversation with the bagpiper as to what you're actually intending to do, unless you have a good understanding of how these articulations are notated and put together. I will give a tutorial on this in a later video. So that's it for an introduction to the Great Highland Bagpipe and things that you'll have to keep in mind if you choose to write for this instrument. In summary, the instrument is tuned to around B flat, somewhere near 480, plus or minus 10 Hertz. It only has 9 notes, the B flat Mixolydian scale, 1 octave plus the lower auxiliary of A flat. Bagpipe music, though, is notated as though it is in A, so if you pick up any music, it will look like it's in A Mixolydian, but it's not. Bagpipe music has no rests. Bagpipers will often be totally unfamiliar with resting notation, and so if you include rests, they will be difficult to execute, and the bagpiper will probably have no idea what you have indicated in the music. The bagpipe includes drones, which, unless you do something to stop the drones, like literally putting a stopper in them, they will sound throughout the time that the bagpipe plays until the air reservoir is depleted. The drones are all tuned to the pitch of B flat for the B flat Mixolydian scale that the bagpipe is tuned to. Of course, a bagpiper will consider these drones tuned to A. Bagpipe music is full of standardized and well understood ornamentation among bagpipers. You might need to consult a bagpiper to figure out ornamentations that you might want to include, or you will need to figure out how the system of ornamentation works yourself. It's highly recommended that if you're going to write for bagpipes and you want a piece that is tonal, using conventional chords, sounds pretty, if you will, to write the piece in B flat, not A. It is literally probably easier to tune an entire orchestra up to B flat than it is to tune a singular bagpipe down to A. The bagpipe will also just not sound as good. It is not meant to tune that distantly from where it is supposed to be. Check out some of the other videos if you're interested in learning more about how to compose for the bagpipe, and check out some of my other videos that feature repertoire from the bagpipe by composers both new and old.